Hey, I'm Justin.
This is Chaz.
Join us as we look back together, but learn to stay present.
Come with us as we rise up with hope on the horizon.
This is the podcast of extraordinary millennial gentlemen.
So there's a few things I think I want to touch on and just relate initially and then kind of the father perspective here, because I think I was in the hospital for a month.
Yeah.
That's what I remember being told. So it was, so very similar timing after all of that. But to go, what you went through, very similar in different reasons. When my wife had Scotty and they found, they always test him and they found like strep, and he kind of had a fever. She kind of had a fever. I mean, it was a crazy long, like 40+ hour delivery. And so they were like, he has to go into the NICU. And they had to give him IVs. He had the same problem with the IVs. The nurses would always come in and twist and check it. I mean, his wasn't as bad. But it was still, I mean, this was right after delivery. So he's newborn. He's in the hospital. And then once she was cleared, we were able to take my wife home, but we had to keep, so I stayed the night there, had to go and get her, but she, through all that, she was so weak, from loss of blood, all this kind of stuff, all the craziness that happened. Not to dive into that, but it was like, I've got two places I needed to be. One was like in the NICU with him. The other was like, well, is my wife going to die as well? And you just use, to focus on, we both are in this situation as fathers first, first boys for us, and you're staring at them and these monitors and these lines coming out of them and all the, a week's worth of antibiotics. I think he was there for 2 weeks is all, but man, those 2 weeks were just crazy.
Yeah. I think we've talked a lot about, so far this recap of the events and what happened. And I think you're hitting a really important part of, these kind of medical emergencies as a crisis. And that is, it's just what comes to my mind, but like logistics.
Oh yeah.
How do I leave my life to deal with this crisis? Well, that's not too hard. You just hope that the circles of friends, family, and coworkers and others, and people who know and experienced life and medical crisis or other crisis or supported others, they know it's like, go, you need to be with your family. Right. And that's huge. That's a huge part of it. And like you said, for your experience with your son being born, how can you provide support in two places at the same time? It's not possible. But then there's also that, how do you, and this was really important for me in our ordeal. It took me a while to figure out. I had some people who really literally held my hand and walked me through this.
Yeah.
And that is, how do you take time for yourself in a crisis to breathe, to try and bring whatever you've got and muster it up and not just be like the typical dad, like strong, like suck it up, you're going to be fine, but actually tap into that emotional side that is nurturing and protective, and stay in that mode as long as it takes and as hard as it is. And I don't mean it's hard because that's not in our nature. I mean, you're in a crisis. You're in a crisis. You're in a tailspin, right? I think a lot of people can relate to having a founded or unfounded fear of a plane going down, right? And it's like, so when you're on planes and you feel those turbulence and you're like, oh, it's a physiological response, right? There's fear and trepidation, but then there's a physical response as well. And for some people, it ramps up your emotions. And it's part of what a medical crisis why it can exhaust you so quickly, because the calories that you're burning, the mental cognition that you're running through, the multiple processes, it's incredibly challenging. So I'm not looking for all the details of how you dealt with that, but what advice would you give somebody that that may go through that? Where how are you emotionally in two places? How do you stay engaged? And how did you manage that crisis?
I look back and it's more,
and not because you did it perfect, but because you can tell people in hindsight, right?
Oh yeah, that's true. It's all, like you said, it's hindsight looking back, and it's you're just like, I don't even know. Like, I wasn't specifically, you're not in the headspace to be like, okay, here's my next step. You just start moving, or you know, I know one of the, I thought I had it all kind of together until, you know, my mom was at the hospital, but until I had to call my sister and
let her know what was going on.
I was like, that's when I knew. I didn't feel, I was like, okay, everything's fine.
You were processing it. And it was interesting because it wasn't the first person you talked to.
Oh no.
But it was somebody who, for whatever reason, the dam kind of breaks, right? Yep. And you have this release, and you're able to let out that fear and kind of give that burden. You know, they talk about that a lot, like sharing a burden. A medical crisis builds up these burdens, right?
Oh yeah.
And they're, No, I'm cutting you off. I apologize, but I can totally relate to what you're saying, even though it wasn't the same instance or the same person or the same type of phone call.
Right. Yeah. It's just, I know that's when the emotions kicked in, and like the physiological reaction. Cause up until then it was just like, if I can do anything, I'm going to do it to save whoever I can, which, you know, a dad in the hospital, you're kind of just in the way. And
that's right.
You're trying, but it's like, I can hold your hand. I can go have my finger squeezed by my son, and I can be there, and I can be present, and
that's right.
Give space for rest when that's needed, and go get food, and I can go get clothes. I can go get, put all this stuff together. Right. Cause those things were needed. And those are just some of the things you're just like, you start to do, because you're again, I think we're wired to solve problems. And in those moments,
that's right,
that fully kicks in, and we're there to try and help and save. And then it was in those quiet times where, you're sitting down eating, I have to call someone, tell them, and that's when I didn't lose it or anything. I just, my sister could tell, and so she kind of did what you did. She walked in and said, "Hey, my brother's going through something. I gotta go." Right, and she was over 4.5, 5 hour drive away, packed up, just that right then and there, showed up whenever she got there, and was there to support as well. And we had others support as well. And I would say the other advice is be willing to talk to someone about it, whoever that may be. And it's not like I need to sit down and have a counseling session, but just
it's crisis mode.
So in your head, you need to just, even if it's just to explain what happened, you may not even know what's going to come out of your mouth. And then willing to, I would say the other piece that I think was, we accepted a lot of help at, family.
That's critical.
Your neighbors or members of your community, your church, whatever, meals were great, and again, I have credit to those I worked with as well. I think the particular company I was at only gives the dad a couple days, and I needed 2 weeks at that point. And so they're like, "Hey, don't worry about it. We'll work it out. Just do what you got to do." And then, balancing at the tail end of that, like the going back and still need, need some extra help.
Difficult transition to go back.
It's never the right time to go back. You never feel like it is. You just have
to do it.
Still elsewhere, but you have.
That's right.
You can't just pause for a year because this happens. it's a very short period of time. And so all those
Yeah.
things were really helpful. I don't know.
Yeah. There's more that's relatable between our experiences, even though it wasn't the same circumstances. There's some common threads. My wife, oh gosh, I don't think she left the hospital overnight for a week, the first week with my son. She was she was still recovering. She was still healing from her C-section. And so my son was starting to turn a corner. He was improving. The PICC line was doing well. They were talking about admitting him or transferring him rather to a normal recovery room. And all of a sudden my wife's running a fever. She can't eat. She's getting sick.
Yeah.
Her face is swelling. She has to go to the emergency room. And so she had complications from the stress, the lack of food, some of the bodily systems, right? That just get ready to have a baby. And it's like the way the doctor explained it, it's like they never stopped. It was like labor continuing in some ways. And I don't look at that and go, gosh, why aren't you taking care of yourself? It's like, my wife is taking care of my son, and it's very impossible to take care of yourself to maintain your health while that type of crisis is going on. You talked about having to be in two places at the same time.
Yeah.
Physically, emotionally. And that played out for me as well. I had 2 kids who were still under 5 at home. But like you experienced, when you're in a crisis, somebody may say, how do you prepare to get through a crisis like that? And it's like, have circles.
Yeah.
Have circles of people who care about you, build those up. And when somebody needs you in that way, be that person, because then they will be that person for you, for your family, for your child, for your loved one. There's not really a better way to prepare that I can think of than that. It's like, be that person when you see a crisis that supports, that makes a meal, that offers help, that says, hey, do you need a break? Can I come watch your kids? What do you need done? Do you guys need groceries? Can I just go get groceries for you?
Right.
Because when you're in a crisis and you get that kind of help, it's those sort of things that should be basic needs that are very difficult to incorporate into your mindset.
Yep.
So I'm a project manager. That's kind of what I do. My background is, and crisis like this is like the largest contingency change management you could imagine.
Yeah.
And so anytime that you try and address what the root cause of the situation is and what your active or corrective actions are, you have to get down as granular as you can that you can possibly understand. Right.
Yeah.
And that technique, you need subject matter experts to come in and fill in where you don't have understanding. And it's very much like that in hindsight, where you're talking to medical professionals all day about the crisis.
Yep.
You have to make decisions as a parent. Can this person receive this? Can they not receive this? And all the while, you have to think, like you mentioned, do you have any time for yourself? Are you able to make those phone calls where you can release a little bit, where you can be more vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
As a dad, it feels really counterintuitive to not try and be the strong one the whole time. And weakness is not what I'm getting at, but I think vulnerability. You have to be willing to be vulnerable and say you don't know, or so
yeah.
I know that's a lot. That's a whole bunch of stuff. It's not very structured.
No, I would also, if you're one of the people that need permission for something, here's I'm giving you permission. If you're ever in these situations, like, you may not want to, but you'll be like, how can I even sleep? Right. In these, like, you'll kind of have those thoughts. They'll go through your head. Like,
you're right.
I can't sleep now. I need to stay up, or whatever. It's a hard line to draw, but you have to still have some boundaries for yourself, because
that's right.
You're not in it for the short game. You're in this for the long game. And for you to be the most effective you can be, you're going to need sleep. You're going to need food. You're right. You have to walk away for that hour to go to the cafeteria or something, decompress, replenish, and then go back in.
Yeah. And you're exactly right. And when you have help and resources, it's like you said, you got to be willing to say, yes, I do need that.
Yeah.
Don't be so unwilling to accept that help, because it may turn into the difference between kind of surviving and starting to really get some recovery for yourself. Right. Like you kind of mentioned, hey, I've got an hour. I can remember having an hour, 2 a.m. and going, you know what, I'm going to walk around the hospital. And that was like during that first week when it was really bad. And what I should have done in hindsight, the stronger me, the wiser me that's been through the crisis and more experienced, it's like, if I had an hour, I should have got outside and walked somewhere that was completely unrelated to that hospital and done something completely unrelated to that medical emergency, and allowed myself to show emotion or connect with people or take that time to ask for some help if I had some specific needs. And instead I kind of went down to the first floor of this hospital and kind of paced and decided that I couldn't stand that place and went back up to that room where it was not that much better. Eventually we had some additional help, family and friends. And I allowed myself to do what you're doing, which is okay. And I really had to help my wife do this in our crisis, where it was like, you can stay here and try and sleep on this tiny little chair with our son, which you've done for days, right? Or you can go home and we will not set a time that you come back tomorrow. Go home, sleep as much as you can or you want to, and you tell me what you want to do tomorrow, right? And those instances, like for my wife, who's a very dedicated mother, one of the kindest people I know, she found that relief physically and getting back to a very structured place in her home and being with her other kids, that she got away from that epicenter of the crisis and got a little bit of a step back experience and was refreshed and renewed. And she would bring more hope back with her. And that was really, really important. Again, like you hit it on the head when you said it's not about, the next 5 minutes, the next 10 minutes, the next 24 hours. But when that crisis first starts, that's all you can process. And that's what you have to process. But then very quickly, you need to start to get to taking care of yourself. Right.
Yeah. And I guess I'd preface this if anybody's in a really, more serious than these situations where though you're not sure it's the long game yet. I mean, stay, right. That totally makes sense.
Absolutely.
But once they're like, when the doctors are like, hey, you go get some food, go get some sleep. Like
nurses will do this. The nurses will say, hey, I can stay with him. I can stay with her. I can be here. And again, that's part of accepting that help. It's not just going to be necessarily people on the outside bringing over fruit baskets. It could be that nurse. It could be those medical professionals saying, why don't you go and do this? They do this day in and day out, right? They care for people for a living.
Hey, thanks for spending some time with us today. Hope you find hope and joy throughout this upcoming week. If you've liked this podcast, please hit the subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, and we'll see you next week.
I ate my grandma.